This is Thorin's YouTube channel. Make sure you're tuning in, hitting subscribe.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this one is going to be Ave, who is a pretty famous 1.6 in-game leader, some say the best. Most famous, obviously, for leading the mTw teams, which at one point in time were the best team in the world and had a pretty epic legacy of their own, won majors, won many titles. And after that, he had his hiatus. He wasn't around in the beginning of CSGO. He did temporarily. There was a rumor, which was actually real. It just never happened, that they were going to come back in CSGO. And in fact, if people don't know, basically, like that just sort of fell apart. Like the investor person just didn't come through. And then while they were still hanging on, Zolik went and became a coach of Astralis, and that literally is, you know, the rest is history, as people say. Like, obviously worked out pretty well for him. But then if people don't know, Ave actually came himself to become a coach. He was coaching with North on the academy in the main squad, and we'll get into the rest in this episode. So one thing I want to ask actually is, having now been involved in CSGO, and it's not like when I do some of my old school interviews with players that haven't played any game for like 10 years. If you ask some of those players, a lot of their thoughts on the game or contrasting it is pretty off, because if you watch the game just casually for fun, it's a bit different from like watching a demo like you would back in the day, or trying to study people's tendencies. You know, you're just getting very broad senses of what's going on. So now that you've actually been involved with coaching and presumably played a bunch of CSGO as well, how would you actually contrast CSGO to CS 1.6? If people like, maybe first give us a definition. Like for you, what type of a game was 1.6, and how is CSGO similar or different for you?
So obviously both are kind of the same thing, but where the different aspects happen is like, the major thing for me is that you can't wallbang anymore in the way you could in 1.6. So take a map like Nuke. In 1.6, you would see half of the rounds CT played. They would not cover the upper bomb spot. They would just wait for some kind of sound cue, and then they would wallbang like crazy. And for a spectator's point of view, for a casual spectator, I would assume that would seem so silly to watch. So that's one major thing. And then there's also how smokes and the utilities work now. They are much more effective in CSGO, in my opinion. So maybe not the flashes, but the other stuff. So there are definitely more different kinds of way to play in CSGO, and we see a lot of different styles, and I like that a lot. I believe 1.6 was more stale in a sense.
Okay. Right, as I mentioned there, there was this period of time where, I think off the top of my head, if Astralis, the team started in 2016, it must have been around 2015 when there was this rumor that like mTw's coming back, and all the players from the classic lineup, like I did my interview with Trace where he talked about it, etc. So he gave kind of like the reasons as to why it didn't happen there. Basically, like the whole point of doing it was you were going to have full backing. You'd all get proper salaries and you'd go in full ball. It wasn't like trying to do a comeback where it's like, we'll do a couple of lands, and if it doesn't go well, we'll quit, etc. Right, here's the thing I want to know is, most teams, even who switched from 1.6, didn't make it with the lineup that switched, because, you know, like a couple of players probably switched just because the others did, or it was just a new game. Some of them probably didn't like it, I'd imagine, didn't put in the hours. So were you actually someone where, if that investor angle had still worked out, would you personally have tried to really keep going at CSGO? Do you actually think as a game to play, not just coach, was it a game that you could embrace? Do you think you would have been good?
I'm not sure it would have been good. There's so many more people playing now, and people with a lot more talent than that I had. So I'm not sure I would have, but maybe, I don't know, because we've seen a lot of the old 1.6ers who made the transition. I'm not sure how I would have fared, but I think I had a lot of trouble. Like I had 2 kids at that point, and I couldn't, like, I didn't have the freedom to give it a proper shot, like invest the hours. If it didn't go anywhere, then it would kind of be bad for my family. So maybe if I had all the time in the world and I could really try to catch up for the years I didn't play, then maybe it could have worked.
Now, if people don't know, when you actually did, aside from this mini attempted comeback, the way you came into CSGO was, as I said, you came in as a coach. But interestingly, you actually came in initially with the North Academy squad, which obviously doesn't exist now because unfortunately that rule got made by the leagues where they basically said you can't have two squads. I mean, I can understand the reasons why. It's because unfortunately the same academy squads, there isn't like an academy league that has money, etc. Basically, people just play in the same qualifier, and you're going to get scenarios where either you play on the same side of the bracket, or you might even play the exact main team, and so all sorts of conflict of interest angles come up. But during this time period when it could exist, at the time, understandably, because it's an academy squad, pretty much none of the players had any fame whatsoever. Like most of them, that was like the first big team they'd even been in, hence why it was an academy squad. But if people don't know, literally, I think almost every single player who was in that team, maybe one or two at most, has not made it to a top squad for some period of time. Like we're talking like, at least like top 20 team at least. So obviously people might know that like Mertz obviously went to the main North squad. Gade now has made it by a different route. I mean, he went over to the Optic team first. So the player I actually want to ask about though is one that I noticed people were very interested in recently, which is Acor, who's come up in this Mad Lions squad and now is looking like a very promising player, because the most interesting detail of this is when he was in this academy squad, he wasn't actually the main AWPer, right? Mertz was on the same team. So was there a reason why no one's kind of noticed this talent that Acor had in that particular sense? Or was he just not a player who wanted to play that well? What would the story be on that?
Yeah, so we obviously had Mertz back then playing the AWP. So Acor had more a secondary AWP role, kind of CT side anchor on a lot of maps. So I believe he was played out of position in the academy team, and that's unfortunate because I could see it back then that he had a lot of mechanical skills, like his movement skills are out of this world. He's watching him like crouch peeking, like the quick wide crouch peek with the AWP. He's so fast at that, and that makes him really unique. And it's in hindsight it would have been nice to like try switching up the roles more to explore the players even more. So maybe Acor could have been in North today if we had discovered his uniqueness back then.
Do you think that that's? I mean, obviously, like I said, the fact that the project basically got shut down. It sounds like a bit of an obvious question, but I'll ask anyway. Since so many of these players, like, listen, it's not like they're all in top teams now. Like, most of them, had a chance or they were at like a low level now. Do you think that the project, basically, the fact that they ended up getting chances, so did it justify the premise of it? Like, if North could have kept this team, would these have been the players that could have then actually come up to the main team? Or would some of them just have never made it anyway because, I mean, it was an academy team? What would your take be?
I definitely think that it makes sense to have an academy team because the buyouts are so high and you can pay academy players a much lower salary and you can really get an in-depth view of the player. So let's say you need a new player. You kind of want to know what kind of personality he has, how he practices and all this stuff. And all that information, you can only get the real picture by having them on an academy team. Obviously, there's all the problems that you mentioned with not being able to play some tournaments. But I think a lot of upcoming players might want to come to a more established organization and get some better training facilities, coaches, and all this in order to improve more than playing some qualifier that they probably will have a hard time qualifying in anyways.
I noticed, just like earlier in the interview where you were very humble, saying like you don't know if you would have been that good in CSGO, etc. Every time I've seen you actually do interviews about when you were coaching in CSGO, you've actually always kind of downplayed it. Like you never tried to make yourself sound like the best coach. When you were working with this academy squad, it was obviously your first proper time coaching in the game. Like, were you able to transfer, do you think, a lot of the knowledge from 1.6 things you knew about teams? Were you able to get through to them, do you think?
Some parts I did pretty well at, I believe. But also I see back on that time as a learning experience for me. We had some conflicts on the academy team, and I would have liked to have handled those better, like being more proactive in handling and helping people get on the same page. Definitely the first iteration we had, I could have taken more authority and stuff like that. From a tactical point of view, it was also a big learning experience for me because the dynamics are so different, as I mentioned, and it took a while for me to really get a full understanding of how CSGO worked. But yeah.
One player who did obviously get a call up to the main team was Mertz. I mean, famously, he came in, he replaced like Cajun with the AWP on the team. This is a player where, again, like I say, in hindsight, people are going to think, why was he the AWP, not Acor, you know? But back then, like, Acor was a nobody, whereas this guy actually, I remember, he looked quite explosive in some games. He certainly had a very fast-firing style, you know, which can be good with the AWP. What do you think was his strength, and what do you think his problem was? Because if people don't know, he kind of like, he initially looked good, but then it didn't really work for him, and then actually he's kind of washed out the scene to some degree. He's not really that relevant a player. So how would you give us the overview on Mertz?
Yeah, so Mertz is also a unique talent. I think everybody who played with him know he has some special ability. Yeah, like you mentioned, a really fast player, kind of maybe not always the right decision, but he makes it work, kind of like Kenny S. But that's an obvious comparison. But I think his main problem was that during his time on the main squad, he kind of burned out. Maybe the travel demands was too much, and he was maybe not mature enough at that point. He was only 18 years old, I think. So maybe everything kind of happened too fast for him. So I think he went to Heroic afterwards. I'm not sure what happened there. And now he's in I think the 6th best team in Denmark or something like that. But maybe we'll see him back someday because I believe he has a lot of ability. He just have to sort out his personal stuff and try to make get more of a schedule going, practice schedule and all that. I think that would help him a lot.
When you came up after this and you became the coach of the main North squad itself, right, what was the logic behind that? Because I know obviously like they'd had, what's his name, Castor, whatever his name is, Casper, the guy who's obviously been with MSL a lot of his career. He obviously was someone who was coaching those squads in Denmark for a long time. You obviously, Roger, that's right, that's his alias, sorry. But one of the reasons I know if people didn't know what you did in the academy squad, people might have thought you got promoted was obviously at a similar time you came along as a coach. Wimp became like the director of esports or whatever, who was obviously a long time teammate of yours. Was that part of the connection as to why you got the chance as the main coach?
Actually, Wimp didn't have. Back then, I believe the players had more say in what they wanted to do. So after the Boston major, where Cloud9 won, a big shuffle was needed in the team. There was some internal problems, and they kind of wanted to shake things up. And the decision was kind of to make it as many, like, replace as much as they thought were needed. And MSL and Valde had a say in that. So that's how the roster ended up like it did. And we obviously got Kærby, kind of surprisingly. And yeah, that's how it came along. It was Wimp obviously also had listened a lot to the players. He was new in the role, so yeah, he approved of the changes, and he also saw that it would be a good time to change the coach because Uga had been there for a year and they didn't feel they were going the right direction anymore.
As you say, like the big move, and at the time, this is the crazy thing, that Kærby move now has become such a meme in the community because obviously, unfortunately for him, Astralis then went on and won like all the majors and everything. Yeah. Meanwhile, he obviously didn't win that much himself in North. So everyone looks back and thinks it was a stupid move. But the funny thing is, like, I've known that guy for a while, so I kind of actually understand what he thought he was going for, because at the time in Astralis, he did kind of look like the odd man out. He was the guy who his form was dropping off a bit. If they were going to replace someone, since he's so young, I'm pretty sure they would have taken another player over him. Meanwhile, I'm sure he looked at the team and thought, when I was in with MSL and Dignitas, that was, you know, maybe my best individual period. I was a very good player. And at the time, if people don't know as well, I don't know how much of this is known publicly, but basically he got a really good fucking contract as well. Like, they gave him the money to be like a star player, because obviously FC Copenhagen was funding the organisation, etc. How would you explain Your thoughts on like the concept of Kirby coming into the North team, and is there something? Was he mismanaged? Has something gone wrong with the way he's played? Because obviously his career's never really fully recovered. Like it's never gone to the heights people hoped he would, and it's hard to know what you put that down. So, do you have any thoughts?
So, like in hindsight, obviously he came in and he wanted to be the star player. He said he wanted to be the best Counter-Strike player in the world. Obviously, that's really nice to hear. An ambitious player come in like that. But maybe I think we just went into practice mode way too soon. I think we should have like taken a pause and kind of talk to him about how things ended up in Astralis like they did, and really not put that many expectations on him right away. It was too much. He was also, I believe, 19 years or something like that, and I just think that the expectations were too much, and also his own expectations. Yeah, it was too much at that time.
Right, I don't know how much you keep up with like the scene of people who post on the forums and Reddit and stuff, but probably one of the biggest memes about North that no one ever really investigates. They just look at it and go, like the famous meme is that AZ must just be like the best friend of MSL or something because he's the only one who never gets kicked and everyone else gets kicked. And somehow AZ's like the lone survivor who just stays in the team forever. Can you give us some insight? What does AZ do in North? Like, is there a logical explanation as to why he is the guy that never gets kicked from the team, no matter what, his stats may be?
Yeah, obviously he has his inconsistent periods, and I think when people sees one match where he has poor stats or whatever, then they just think, oh, they should replace him. But they don't see how he handles himself in practice. They don't see all this stuff, and he really gives a lot to a team. Also from a tactical point of view, he's engaged in the strategies. He comes up with a lot of stuff, so he's a really important player in that sense. He also has really high ceiling. Like when he's on, also when we won the DreamHack Masters, he's so damn good. He could have been the MVP in that tournament just as much as MSL, in my opinion. So the thing about him is the inconsistency, and I believe when the HLTV crew or not the forum dudes, they see a bad match from him that just think they should get rid of him or whatever, and it's so silly because when the team falls apart, really when I was with the team, when we fell apart, it was not like because one player played a really poor game. It was like more a collective thing, and then okay, maybe the stats show that AC did bad, but every time we lost, there was so many different reasons, and not like a poor performance from him, in my opinion.
At this point in time, the biggest player who was in this team was probably actually Valde, because I mean he was one of the few guys who performed very well, and his career's sort of been taking a rise, step up. In fact, a lot of people would have thought if Astralis was ever going to make changes, he seemed like the next candidate. He was the guy where it seemed like an obvious person to pick up. What was he like to work with, and what would you say his skills are? What's his strengths?
So I believe his strengths are very much in his consistency, just like his aim. No matter how pressured he is in a game, he would always be calm, and he saw the game very clearly. In my opinion, he also had a lot of like good thoughts on how to play fundamental Counter-Strike. I learned a lot from him actually, and also a really good team player in a lot of rounds. Yeah, maybe the negative thing with him was that he would be very engaged when we played officials, and when we played practice, he wasn't on as much. So we kind of had a stretch where we tried to fix that, so our practice would be more like the officials, because like the tone of voice and stuff like that was so different. But we improved on that, in my opinion, over time. But yeah, that was maybe the negative thing with him only I could come up with. Yeah, as I said, he has a really calmness about him, and that serves him really well when he plays.
Now, obviously, the in-game leader of this team, MSL, is someone who it feels like he's like equally famous and infamous. Because on the one hand, like he's taken a lot of like some of the younger players and lineups that shouldn't maybe have been that good, and sometimes overachieved. Obviously, won tournaments, had big placings at competitions. He's also, like in this team at times, had the periods where it's been underwhelming, and because he's not a huge, like, he's not a big figure, he's not a charismatic guy in that sense, he's never been like a fan favourite in that regard. You know, he's another person where fans overlook him. You obviously known from 1.6 as a legendary tactical in-game leader. Like, this is something you were very, very engaged with. How does MSL measure up in that regard? Like, what type of a leader is he in your mind?
Yeah, so in my mind, he's a very, he's a leader who really takes charge. So in the game. So when he in-game leads, he micromanages all the whole team. I believe that's something he's tried to. He said recently in the interview that we can't win with my thoughts only, and I think that's a nice realization for him, because oftentimes he would be so focused on micromanaging everybody that his performance would suffer a lot, and you can't it can be hard to win when you have one guy underperforming a lot. But he did so much good stuff for the team, micromanaging all the players, and this made sure that everybody was on the same page. So we won a lot of rounds, and also the Masters victory was very much his performance, because he saw the game so clearly and he made all the right calls. And made sure everybody was on the same page. Yeah, that's his uniqueness. Also, he has some very creative ideas when he came. A lot of the playbook was tactics he came up with by himself, not so much me. So he's also a guy who thinks Counter-Strike 24/7. It comes up with new ideas, and you can see that they adopted Vertigo really quickly, and that doesn't surprise me at all, because I can imagine him sitting on the server and figuring out how to play Vertigo and figuring out much quicker than other teams.
As you've referenced already, that DreamHack Masters Stockholm is one of the craziest tournaments I think I've ever seen in CSGO history, because it's not like that team was a new lineup. They'd already had a whole bunch of tournaments where they looked average, and then coming to this tournament, people forget he didn't just win the tournament, but it was one of the only times anyone in that era beat Astralis twice to do it. And on top of that, MSL was the star AWPer and won MVP of the tournament. It almost seems like a dream that someone had or something. What would you explain as to how this happened? Like, was there any kind of signs beforehand that suggested this was possible?
So I think actually the catalyst behind that victory was Nico. So Nico is a really funny guy, and what we struggled with for all the time up until Masters was that the pressure of the organization and everybody expecting us to perform in a certain way. And we really struggled with that. We were too nervous, in my opinion. And when Nico came along, he was he just was kind of disrespectful in a sense. So everybody was kind of laughing, and it really took a lot of the pressure off, and that just kind of made us snowball through that tournament. I believe that was a lot of the reason behind why everything unlocked in that tournament.
Now, as I say, the bizarre thing as well about MSL being like the MVP of the tournament and now AWPing Device is he obviously tried to AWP after that. He definitely did not become one of the best AWPers in the world. Like, he definitely did not become at Device's level. Now, he made some sort of a comment after winning that tournament. Like, I don't know how much this is hyperbole, which is why I'm going to ask you, where he made it sound like, well, you know, you can like beat a guy when you've watched like 150 demos of him or something. Some crazy stat like that, which listen, sounds baller if you're an in-game leader, because it makes you sound like you just downloaded the whole opponent, he knew everything's good. Do you think that's true? Did he really put in that kind of effort? Did he say any of this to the team that he was studying the opponents or whatever?
I knew he watched a lot of demos. He definitely did. I'm not sure he looked at a device's point of view like 150 demos. It was probably more like the Astralis demos as a whole, and watching what they're doing as terrorists and try to steal some of the tactics and all this that happens all the time. But I can imagine he watched over 100 Astralis demos. You always, I guess in all esports, you always watch what the best teams are doing.
Sure.
And we watched Astralis all the time, trying to adopt some of their tactics and trying to figure out how to stop them.
Now, the reason also why that event is somewhat infamous, and people will say it's a fluke, etc., or, you know, it was just, you caught everyone by surprise, is because unfortunately, and this is how MSL got kicked from the team, the very next event was the minor for the major, and so everyone thought, well, if they can win that event, they can easily get through this minor, and famously didn't qualify from the minor, and literally got MSL kicked like something crazy, like 2 weeks after he was the MVP of a huge tournament.
It was the challenger state.
Yes,
state,
yeah, you're right, it wasn't the minor, it was basically like what used to be the qualifier, rather. There we go. So can you give us some thoughts? Like, what do you think went wrong in this challenger stage? And yeah, like general thoughts, because it must be very bizarre to go from such a high to such a low, and then basically for the org to kind of go, that was a fluke because they kicked him out the team.
Yeah, it was such a crazy roller coaster ride. So when we won Masters, we had like one day where some of us traveled directly to London. Some of us went home to see our family for one day and then go travel for possibly 3 weeks. I believe that kind of travel demand, and we had some players who got sick. So I believe like the first round, we had people playing with fevers. And then also it was kind of a shock coming from a well-organized tournament like DreamHack, and then coming to the Faceit major where they had some terrible computers at the beginning, and our players couldn't really they couldn't get away from the fact that they had under 200 frames per second when they played deathmatch. So they were so frustrated they didn't want to play because the game felt so bad on the computers, and it kind of messed up with our training. I tried all I could, like trying to explain it doesn't matter with the FPS. If we play Counter-Strike like we played at Masters, then we're fine. We need to focus on our team play, not on the bad FPS. But it was too much of a challenge for us, both the stuff happening around the tournament with the computers, and also just like the stress levels coming from the big adrenaline rush of winning a Masters and then playing the Challenger stage. It was a combination of those two things, in my opinion.
Now, it wasn't that long. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it wasn't that long in the wider context. I think it's like maybe something like 6 months before you yourself exited North. And basically, if someone only watches Tier 1 Counter-Strike, like that's, until this interview, that's the last they heard of Ave. So what happened on your end? Like, do you think actually, like, was it fair? Do you think you underperformed as a coach with the main team? Was it a justified kick? Should they have given you more time? Where do you come down on it?
It was back after the major, MSL got kicked by this. So basically, he made a really angry tweet about how the tournament was poor, and I could understand where he's coming from. We had so many team discussions about how poor the tournament was in general, but he was not allowed to tweet like that because we tried to solve the issues with the tournament organizer directly. So the CEO kind of said, okay, he's a loose cannon and we can't accept behavior like that. He needs to go. And they had some other stuff going on. So that was the reason why his contract was terminated. And I didn't approve of the move. I thought we should have kept him. But in the end, it was my decision. And then, yeah, like you said, I had 6 more months playing with the Acadian instead, and that's at that point I had to see to my family.
Okay. Since you referenced earlier, I mean, it makes sense if not only for a Danish team, but since Astralis was the best team and you're trying to play tactical Counter-Strike, like they, in many ways, were the best in the world at that. What would you say as someone from the outside watching Astralis? Because the interesting thing to me has been, now everyone in CSGO is going to tell you, like, Zonic's the best coach ever, you know, he's so amazing and stuff. But people obviously might not realise he wasn't the in-game leader of your teams. You were the in-game leader. But he did have some, like, wasn't he kind of one of the guys who kind of worked with you on some of those things? So what have you thought of his development in this kind of new career he's had?
Yeah, so I think I said it in another interview. I believe he has such a perfect combination of character traits to make him a good coach. I guess you can measure a lot of CSGO coaches on how good they are as leaders, like providing authority. Then you can also see on how good they are at motivating the team in general, setting a good mood for the practice and keeping people focused. And then the third aspect is obviously the tactical side. And I believe he performs really well in all three aspects. So I believe what's make him such a good coach, probably the best in the world.
Okay. Now, as I said, in the meantime, we haven't seen you do anything, and it wasn't until very recently you just came out of hibernation. You made a tweet and you basically just said, you know, like, I'm looking to get back into things. Now, I noticed there you didn't specify. I just assumed you meant I want to be a coach again, and maybe a coach of a Danish team. Like, what were you thinking of at this point in time? Like, what would be the kind of a job? Is it coach that you'd want to be? Do you want to be the general manager of a team? What are you envisioning if you come back to CSGO now?
Yeah, so like I said in my tweet, I'm open for different roles. I'm not sure yet what role I'm gonna end up in, but I believe in coaching can take CSGO to new heights, and I can do some kind of secondary coach for a more known team, or I could be the head coach for a lesser known team. It has to be the right situation for me. I'm open for both international and Danish teams, but yeah, it's I'm looking at all my options right now, and I believe like a secondary coach role could be good for me also, because I could like sit back and learn from some other coach, which I haven't had the opportunity to do yet. I definitely have a way to go to like become the coach I want to be, and I believe that if I were to work closely with another one, then maybe I could find new sides on how to approach coaching in general.
Now, one thing I found quite interesting was one of my little birds, the people who just give me a little piece of info around the scene. One thing that's interesting is a lot of people will know that for the last few years, I mean, some of these have been private companies, but there've been people who've made like stats engines basically. And I've actually, often they come to me as well, you know, and say, do you want to try this out, or would you use it? You know, because eventually the plan is they want to license it to teams, and then they think that teams, just like, you know, in NFL or NBA, use all these advanced metrics, you know, eventually it'll become a good business model. It's not a terrible idea. And when I've used these tools, they are super powerful. Like, you literally can do things like identify like an exact spot on the map that if this player plays with this gun versus this type of a like, you can tell every single detail, like how much damage he does there versus if he's like, you know, 2 feet over to the right. So the potential certainly seems there. But I will say, when I tried using them myself, my problem was the opposite. It wasn't that there wasn't any good stats. It's like there was just so much you could do. It was like, fuck, what filter do I even add to this? Like, what would I want to look at? What's relevant? So the interesting thing is, on the one hand, I feel like it is a really untapped area of the game. Like, as far as I know, almost no coaches, except perhaps, I think there's like Cloud9's old coach who now is like the data analyst there. Valens supposedly does some of this stuff because he's kind of like a maths nerd. But generally, it's not really used. But at the same time, I also can sort of see it because it's tough to know what to get from it, etc. And I feel like some people would just get lost in the mixer. But what I heard was you were one of the few people who was basically trying to apply advanced statistics and data analysis to some of the coaching concepts. So can you give us some thoughts on that? Like, where did the idea come from? Like, how useful was it, do you think?
I believe it was very useful, and the potential is enormous in my opinion. Like, when I started analyzing teams, I kind of did like a I did in 1.6. I went to hltv.org, found a demo, and I looked through the demo. And a lot of looking through that demo can really be automated. So tools will tell you what sticks out. I actually built a prototype myself, like where I could draw some squares on top of a map, and then whenever a player would enter the square, it would register he went there, and then I could filter out all the eco rounds, and so I only looked at full buy situations, and then I could say to my players, okay, this guy, he goes here every round. We need to really be aware of that. But in hindsight, you can like use all the tools you want, and as long as you have to like deliver it in an interesting way for the players to remember, because too often I found myself like talking about an opponent for more hours, and then it was just too much to put on the players. They didn't like it, went in the one ear and out of the other sometimes, and that was a shame. But it's an interesting area, and I believe the way to get players more into it is that they use the tools themselves and get like the feeling themselves, because then they remember when they play the game.
Sure. I mean, on similar lines, actually, when you say that last part about getting players involved, one of the things that really sold me on the fact that, like, listen, Device was always a very good player in CSGO. Like, he was one of the top players. But one of the things that really made me realize, like, he could become the best, was when I remember seeing interviews and talking to him, and he basically said that he was one of the few individual players who was studying heat maps and demos of the other AWPer. Like, he wasn't just watching the team like a lot of people do, where, you know, you get together, like you're saying, the coach gives you the tendencies, some of the players listen, some of them don't, or you get the overall tactics, and, you know, if a guy's an entry fragger, maybe he just thinks, what do I care about that? I just run in first anyway. The difference was this guy actually was taking like the scouting approach, and he was trying to figure out, if I know some of the tendencies of this guy, I can have the jump on him, or he won't know where I'm going to be, because if he studied my demo, actually I'll be in a different spot. This feels like another untapped area, right? Like, I mean, it's funny because I know in 1.6, all the in-game leaders used to do a lot of this scouting, but even back then, it's hard to get star players involved with this. A lot of them are, I've even heard stories of some players who say, I don't want to know that. I don't want to like overthink it. I want to just take the shot as if normal, because they're so skilled, they think they'll win anyway. What do you think on this? Like, should all players do this ideally? Should it only be a certain situation in which a player does it? What do you think?
I believe it's something the team has to decide on in as a team. So, do we want to be a team who prepares? Do we want to be a team who makes some anti-strats occasionally, or do we want to play our own game 100% and then just focus so much on executing the tactics that we have been through? You can decide on that as a team, in my opinion. And if you have players that don't want to prepare, and you have some that want to prepare, then you have a problem. Because I've heard more players say that they feel mindfucked when they try to think of the preparation. They feel like it's then they have to think about, oh, what the enemy team does this, and we have this strategy that we want to execute, and then it's they think too much and start losing focus. So it has to be, you have to find a common ground for the team in that format that works for everybody, in order so they can perform.
Now, obviously, this must be interesting for you, because your background was like you were one of the best at this. Like you were quite infamous for being able to anti-strat people. In fact, I know the funny thing is, the Swedish teams back then, who always have been more about, like, you know, it's more like the vibe in the team, and you just have a bunch of skilled players, and then they almost just hope they wake up one day and the team's awesome. They actually used to almost make out like it was unfair to do this, like you would try hard in too much, you know, like, oh, this is bullshit, like you should just play the game, because obviously that would give them a better chance to win the game, right? But the reason why I can see why everyone doesn't do it is there's a skill to it, right? Like, it's not just you study the demo and you know he's going to be in that spot, because like the key angle I would say people miss is, it doesn't matter if you know what he's going to do. You have to have something that actually is appropriate even against that. Like sometimes, for example, you think he's there, but maybe you can't execute the thing you need to do to counter that. And it would fuck the round up if you try to do it. So what's kind of Ave's sense for when it's appropriate to anti-strat? And do you think CSGO as a game is as susceptible to be able to anti-strat the top teams as 1.6 was?
It definitely, from my experience, anti-strat won't work every time. We often found a tendency we wanted to exploit, and then we came up with anti-strat, and we didn't really have time to go on a server and try to throw the HE or the nade stack 5 times in a row. We just came up with it a few hours before the match, and when we did it like that, it will always fail. So in my opinion, it's a better approach to have a kind of deep playbook and then see the tendency and kind of use a part of the playbook more to exploit whatever tendency you find. That's what I ended up doing in the end.
One thing I actually wanted to ask you about was one of the other reasons why it must be interesting being a coach instead of an in-game leader is, like you say, when you study the demo and you get all the information, well, the good thing about being the in-game leader is you're in the game doing that stuff. So actually you can take some of the knowledge burden off those players. Obviously, you can adapt in real time, whereas if you're the coach, you kind of instruct them before. You get a few timeouts, sometimes not that many, and you have sort of limited interaction. So, right, if people might not know this, but in League of Legends, totally different game, right? Over in Korea, they purposely designed their tournaments so that when they would have the playoffs of their tournaments, it was a thing from old StarCraft where to make the game more hype, they'd have, sometimes a week between the playoff matches. And the idea was you could literally just practice for that one team. You could study everything about them. And in theory, it should, you'd hope it would make for the most epic game because you're not just playing on that day's form, like we think of in Counter-Strike tournaments. You're really trying to figure out what are my strengths versus him, what's his weaknesses I can exploit. And one of the interesting things is we don't really ever get that in CSGO. We do a little bit, sometimes your first round opponent in a tournament, but obviously most tournaments still, you play every day almost if you're the top team. And actually one of the things that coaches always tell me is very hard is it's those games where you finish the game at 11 p.m, the next game's 10 a.m, and you now have the choice, right, do I sleep 3 hours and study the extra demos? Do I just get some sleep and not study a bit? Or even if I study them all, will I have time to get people to learn what we're going to do? Because as you say, it's all well and good giving someone an hour speech before. How much of that are they going to remember, especially when they're trying to shoot people with a crosshair? So is it something where were you able to embrace the idea that you had limited time and you had to wreck your own sleep schedule to do it? Would you actually like a world in which you had this prep time and every team could potentially study for 3 or 4 days for a big game?
I would love the prep time, definitely. It would also maybe be a bit less stressful. The way you play tournaments, it has to be over in 3 days, some of them, and it's a lot of CS to be played in a very short amount of time. And much of the prep you have to do from home, and then when you kind of look at your old prep you made weeks ago, then it's I can't remember why I came up with this idea. So if you had the prep time, you could really put in a proper game plan, and also, like you said, for StarCraft, it should make some more epic game because you can probably tell why the teams are playing like they do because they're trying to counter each other, and what kind of dynamics coming out of that is probably fun to watch if you are really into the details.
Sure. Right, at the end of this interview, do you have a final message for people or anyone you want to thank?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to thank North for my time there. It probably didn't end like I wanted to. We bombed out the minor. There was a sad feeling, but I definitely learned a lot during my time in North. And thanks to Sonic, who I still talk to sometimes.
Yeah, tusen tak.
I'm a bit tired. Yeah, det var så lidt.
This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Bobby, Dean Tanglis, Istar, JDubs, Jensen Goh, the Puyallup Tribe, Soliko, Spencer Green, Tobias Bernasconi, Xinged, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question in those AMAs I do each month. Do you want teasers for who's going to appear next on my content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy discussions about esports with me. Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.